Good afternoon. Why don't we sit here in the gloomy afternoon that's rainy and cold and have a chat about a book or two and an author or two and a bird who can't decide what he wants. The bird is Ruby Cheap. The author is both Jane Austen and Joan Aiken. Two really amazing authors. But let's start with Jane Austen. So Jane Austen lived between 1775 and 1817, and she wrote books. She didn't write very many. For those of us who adore her writing, like myself, we read and reread and enjoy and discuss and revisit those 6 complete novels and bits and pieces that we have from her writing and her life. And at some point, I think might have been after her death, a set of writings was found. It's believed to have been began by Jane Austen while she was living in Bath in 1803 through to maybe 1805. It was untitled when it was found, and it had no formal chapter divisions. It was about, according to Wikipedia, it was about 7,500 words long. There wasn't much there. It was just a start, and there weren't extensive notes about where it was meant to progress. Now, that novel has come to be known as The Watsons, amongst those of us who read Jane Austen and talk about Jane Austen books. After Austen's death, it was published as an incomplete set of writings, and then it went through so many metamorphoses. A couple of her different relatives, I think a niece and maybe a grandniece or something, both completed it in different book formats. One person, if I'm not mistaken, actually took this fragment and turned it into a 4-novel book. But this was one of Jane's descendants, and my understanding, I haven't read that one, my understanding is that she concentrated too heavily on various principles like the fate of women, so I guess you'd say feminist principles, the fate of women in Regency England. And while Jane Austen's work are frequently caustic on the subject, and certainly mention it, often even bitter, she manages to do it amusingly in a way that the reader enjoys it. Her descendant did not have that skill, apparently, and that's one reason why I have never read it. I think The Watsons was originally published in 1871 by the novelist's nephew, James Edward Austen Leigh, and Leigh? I'd go with Leigh, okay. And he put it in the revised and augmented edition of his A Memoir of Jane Austen. Now, while it's been through many, many metamorphoses, I honestly don't know what he's doing up there. I have read a couple of them. I don't enjoy reading the one that has been published by Penguin just as it is, just as Jane left it, incomplete. We do know that though she didn't write notes or say what she wanted to have it completed, she did discuss with her beloved sister Cassandra how she anticipated the novel progressing. So, enter Joan Aiken. Aiken. Someone will know. Tell me. I feel like it should be Aiken, and I mentioned it. I've called her that for a long time, but now what with Terry Pratchett and Tiffany Aiken, I'm not sure anymore. Anyway, she was a much beloved, or is or was? I think was. I could be wrong. Much beloved English author. She received the MBE for services to children's literature, and she was known as an author of wild fantasy, gothic novels, short stories, spooky stuff. She loved her ghost stories, and she wrote it often. And she is possibly best known for her Wolves Chronicles, which begins with The Wolves of Willoughby Chase, a series that I used to have the whole thing of. I no longer have. I don't believe, unless it's in a box somewhere. I really wish I did. Now, I liked Joan Aiken's work. I loved her dark fantasy and her children's ghosty fantasy. She and Alan Garner were two of my favourites. But later, I discovered that Joan Aiken was also a very great fan of Jane Austen and her work, and she wrote quite a few companion novels, including what is probably my favourite ever Jane Austen companion novel, Jane Fairfax. Jane Fairfax is a companion volume to Emma, because a small character in Emma, who is actually a much more sympathetic character and much more interesting in many ways than our main protagonist, gets a volume of her own, courtesy of Joan Aiken. This is my favourite Jane Austen companion or related work. I think it's beautifully written. I think it gets the sense of Austen's deft touch with humanity, her analytical and deeply cynical eye on people and society and what they do and how they feel. How you can be that cynical and that caustic and still combine it with a great sense of fairness and sympathy for people and what they want from life, their foibles, their desires, their miseries. I don't know. She was just fantastic at that. Anyway, back to the Watsons specifically, the abandoned or unfinished novel that has been through so many metamorphoses. I've read a number of them. I've got a couple of them, including the unfinished version that Penguin published. It's way up there, you can't see it. But I've always remembered fondly the unfinished novel which was completed by Joan Aiken. And I haven't seen this for years. So when I came across it recently, I was really excited and very excited to reread it. Because I remembered this as being the most satisfying, the most enjoyable take on the Watsons that anyone has done. I felt that Aiken got that deft touch that Jane Austen had in writing people and situations, which honestly I've never found another author that had that sort of deftness of humanity. Josephine Tay maybe, but there's not many. If you love Jane Austen and you think that her touch of humanity is as extraordinary as I feel it is, any other authors that you think get there as well, let me know, unless it's George Eliot. I have thoughts and feelings about George Eliot, but yes. So I was thrilled to reread this. I hadn't reread this for at least a decade or so. I remembered it fondly. What I didn't know when I picked it up was that Joan Aiken actually did write Regency fiction, and of course Jane Austen was Regency. I think that comes across in the book in that she knows her era so well, though that could be from being a Jane Austen fan as well. Okay, synopsis. What we've got in this book is about a fortnight worth of fragment that Austen actually wrote, and it was only there really to introduce the main characters. Now they're based in Surrey, and Mr. Watson is not a central figure, but he is there behind the scenes. He is a widowed, ailing clergyman. He's got 2 sons and 4 daughters, and the youngest daughter, Emma, who is our main protagonist, our heroine, if you will, had gone away from the family and was brought up by a wealthy aunt, Mrs. Turner, I think it was Turner, her aunt and uncle, who took her on, adopted her, promised to leave her some money. They educated her more extensively than would have been possible by a widowed and not very wealthy clergyman with a lot of children, and has only recently returned home. Her aunt decided to marry again, and there was a deep antagonism between Emma and her new husband that ended up in Emma being sent home. As a consequence, she doesn't entirely fit in with her family, and she is a happy personality. She is happy, vivid, bright, and intelligent. One thing that Austen does very well is create protagonists who, even though they're in uncomfortable or unpleasant situations, a vivid, bright, if not opinionated, then at least firm in their own character and their beliefs. And that makes these very, very contemporary feeling women for us to relate to. Now, I'm not saying that such women were rare in the Regency period or in history in general, but a lot of historical novels don't emphasize those characteristics in their women protagonists. So Austen does this amazingly well compared to many others. She makes them likable and she makes them feel contemporary. They feel like characters that a 2020s woman could relate to instantly. And that might be one reason why she has been so continuously in favour for so long. Okay, so Emma's come home and she's bonded instantly with her elder sister Elizabeth, who's kind, good-hearted, has good sense, and she basically runs the house for her father, because the other two sisters, Penelope and Margaret, are flighty and not pleasant people. Though Emma doesn't really know them at this stage, she knows that Penelope once shouldered in on a fondness that was being created between Elizabeth and another clergyman, and ended up with him breaking off with her. Margaret is not at home at the time. She has gone with her elder brother and his wife to live in Croydon, and she is relentless in her pursuit of finding a husband. Now, this is something that Jane Austen fans often visit with relation to Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet's relentless pursuit of any man in pursuit of getting her daughters married in Pride and Prejudice is ludicrous, and it's a bit of a parody. She stops just short of being a stereotype, and only someone who writes as well as Jane Austen could stop her from being a stereotype. But in modern days, a lot of people have pointed out that Mrs. Bennet, however stereotypical, is actually being realistic. Far more realistic than Mr. Bennet. She knows there isn't enough money to support all her daughters after Mr. Bennet dies. She wants to see them supported. I think you could say the same thing allegedly about Margaret and the Watsons. It's a stretch. I've always thought it was a bit of a stretch for Mrs. Bennet. I think it's even more of a stretch for Margaret, though Margaret isn't portrayed as a sympathetic character. And while needing to get married might be a realistic attitude to life, I think Jane Austen makes it clear that she feels that there's ways and means of going around about that. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Hello, Angry Bird. But that is pretty much as far as she got. Emma is seen as being a little bit more elevated than her sisters. So when her older brother and her wife go back to Croydon, they invite her to come back, but Emma doesn't feel that it's a sincere invitation, so she doesn't go with them. Now there is where Jane Austen's notes on the subject finish. But her nephew's memoir has some ideas about how it was meant to continue based on things that Austen discussed with her sister Cassandra. So she wanted Mr. Watson, she planned for Mr. Watson to soon die and for Emma to become dependent for her home on her narrow-minded sister-in-law and her brother. She was to decline an offer of marriage from Lord Osborne, who is described as an amiable enough but not very intelligent and easily led lord in the area. And a tension exists between Emma and Lady Osborne, Lord Osborne's mother, because there's the budding of an interest between her and the clergyman Mr. Howard, who Lady Osborne has designs on. So those were the things that Cassandra said Jane had discussed with her as putting into the Watsons later. And the other thing is that she intended apparently for Emma to eventually marry Mr. Howard. For the Austen reader, there are a lot of themes and a lot of characters and a lot of narratives in this book that will seem quite familiar. So the elderly clergyman father upstairs, a bit of out of touch with reality, screams Mansfield Park at us. We've got the wild sisters desperate to get married or whatever, that's themed. The vulgar Jane, the sister-in-law from Croydon, that's a character that seems to be straight out of Emma, that woman that the clergyman marries. I've forgotten her name, but it was quite horrible, and who also appears in Jane Fairfax. The themes and concepts are basic and familiar, and that's on this rereading it made me realize just how amazing the finished books of Austen are, because these themes are there and they're not unique. She uses the same themes and the same concepts and similar settings over and over again, but not one single one of her books doesn't feel fresh and invigorating and beautiful and unique in itself. So that's really impressive. And I think from the beginning of this book, you can see how much investment she put in them. So as an Austen lover, I'm very sad that she only left us with 6 complete books and a couple of bits and pieces. But as an Austen lover, I really, after reading this again, truly appreciate how much time, thought, and love she invested into her books, and it comes through. Now, Emma Watson by Joan Aiken and Jane Austen. I do appreciate what Aiken does here, making it both the authors together. On this reread, I enjoyed it, but I was a bit saddened to find that I wasn't as uncritical of it as I was the first time I read it. When I first read it, I thought it was the next best thing to reading Jane Austen that could possibly happen. This time around, I was more critical. At times in the paragraph, you could see where Jane Austen's deft touch gives way to Joan Aiken, who writes beautifully, but it just wasn't the same. And I was uncomfortable by the way in which Joan Aiken descends the plot into discomfort. So one thing that she's done here is that after Mr. Watson, the father, does actually die, as Cassandra claims that Jane intended, the sisters Elizabeth and Emma are homeless. They're split up. They're sent to her brother and sister-in-law in Croydon at one stage, but the other sister, Penelope, has married someone and taken over a local house which they're building up, and the sisters live there as well. It gives Aiken a chance to revisit the notions of doing up a house, of the different types of societal censure that people will have for certain types of buildings, certain types of people, their background, and so forth. And Emma Watson herself, I think, continues pretty consistently good throughout, but it feels more like Aiken, and Aiken did like writing those ghosty, dark stories. It descends more into darkness than I think Austen would have made it, and I feel like the miserable days that Emma spends without family and disenfranchised from her sister Elizabeth would have been handled with more finesse by Austen. It's still a good book. It's one of the better rewritings of Jane Austen's work that I've encountered, but it isn't as spectacularly beautiful as some of Aiken's work is. Like Jane Fairfax, I've remembered that I've never not owned a copy of this book since I first encountered it. I currently own 2. They're so deft, so perfect, and Emma Watson feels like Aiken sometimes lost track of what she wanted to do. Never is that as obvious as in the end. We know that Austen's aim was for Emma to eventually marry the guy, what's his name? Howard, Mr. Howard. Hello, do you wish to join us? I don't think you do, but you sound like you do. Look at that beautiful log you've got to sit on. Yes, anyway. So, I don't think that Austen would have been as clumsy in making Emma and Mr. Howard at loggerheads. And I think that that led to Aiken having written herself into a corner. She knew that Emma and Howard were meant to end up together, but she'd written too many flaws into Howard's character and too many disagreements that were too fundamental between Emma and Mr. Howard. And at the end, she had no escape from the fact that they had to be separate. So she wrote in a new love interest for Emma Watson, a sea captain who's actually a cousin of Mr. Howard, and that's fine. Most of the characters end up partnering by the end of it. Some of them happily, some of them maybe less so. And I feel like it's been too neatly tied off. Everything is tied off. And I think that's a feature of Regency romance, which apparently Aiken writes, but I don't think it's a Jane Austen feature. Jane Austen knew how to leave something unfinished because no story ever ends, it just turns into another story. Austen knew how to do that. Aiken in this book did not do so satisfactorily for me. So, the ending, especially, where Emma marries her sea captain and travels the world with him for years, it seemed too modern. I think it will appeal to modern readers of this book and to younger Jane Austen fans. Like when I first read it in my early 20s, I thought it was marvellous. But now, as an older person who is a bit more critical, a lot of the later part of this book feels like dodges that didn't quite come off compared to the first parts. How very critical of me. Joan Aiken is a marvellous writer, and I feel a bit wrong to be criticising her at all, but this is my review of this book. So yes, it's a great book. The minutiae are wonderful, like the descriptions of the houses and the parks, especially the English park type atmosphere. The individuals and the characters were great. Aiken isn't as interested in dress, so even those very delicate glancing touches that you would get from Austen are not in this one. Rather, we've got the sister-in-law who is obsessed with dress in a strange and funny way. Still a great book though. I'll stop criticising it now. I will post this review. If you love Jane Austen in general and you kind of wish there was more of it, certainly consider Joan Aiken's interpretation of the Watsons. I'm keen to try more interpretations of the Watsons. Like I said, I've already got a couple, but this has made me think I should maybe hunt out some more. Okay. Thanks for watching this review, which has absolutely nothing to do with science fiction except some of them in the background. And have a great day. Read good books.